It's our stories. Welcome to a world where real stories sounds like a movie script.
Looking back now, it almost feels like I was watching someone else's life slowly unravel while I stood there pretending everything was fine. I used to think I was a rational person, someone who could handle problems calmly, someone who believed that love and trust were enough to hold two people together. But that illusion shattered the day I realized how quietly a relationship can die, not with screaming or betrayal, but with small, persistent dismissals that make you start doubting your own feelings. Jade and I had been together for 3 years, living together for one. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone turn their heads. She had this radiant self-assurance that I admired, and for a long time I thought it was what balanced us. She was spontaneous and fiery. I was steady and deliberate. It felt like harmony back then, her chaos softened by my calm, my order brightened by her spark. For the first 2 years, everything between us felt like the kind of ordinary happiness that most people spend their whole lives searching for. We built routines that made us feel secure. Friday takeout nights, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and music, quiet evenings cooking together while she talked about her friends and her job. I liked our life. It wasn't perfect, but it felt solid, something that could last. Then, about 6 months before everything collapsed, her ex-boyfriend Dylan moved back to town. I remember how casually she mentioned it, as if it were nothing. She said he had just moved nearby, that they'd dated briefly years ago, and that they had decided to catch up. It sounded innocent. I had no reason not to believe her. The first time she went to see him, she said they were meeting for coffee. Then coffee became a weekly thing, and soon after, she started calling it book club. I thought it was cute at first, the idea of her joining something social and intellectual, but it turned out this book club didn't have any other members. It was just her and Dylan. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off with a kind of weary amusement, as if my concern was childish. She told me I was being insecure, that I had nothing to worry about, and that I needed to learn to trust her. I wanted to believe that, so I did. I told myself that love required trust, even when it felt uncomfortable, that it was my job to be understanding. But over time, small doubts began to grow roots. She started dressing differently on those Saturdays, nicer clothes, makeup she never wore for our dates, perfume I hadn't smelled on her in months. When I'd suggest spending the evening together, she'd tell me she already had plans. She was always tired when she came home, always distracted, her phone buzzing constantly with messages she never seemed to want me to see. I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, everything else in my life was going so well. I had just been offered a major promotion at work, a position leading our company's new London office. It was the kind of opportunity most people dream of. A 6-figure salary, full relocation, and an apartment paid for the first year. It felt like everything I'd worked for was finally paying off. But when I told Jade about it, she didn't look excited. She told me she couldn't imagine leaving her family, her friends, her entire life here. She said I could take it if I wanted to, but the way she said it made it clear that if I went, I'd be going alone. I turned it down, twice. I told myself that love was worth more than career advancement, that I'd have other chances. But deep down, I think I already knew the truth. I wasn't turning it down for love. I was turning it down out of fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Things kept spiraling after that. Her so-called book club expanded into weekends and late-night hangouts. Sometimes she'd stay over because they were drinking wine and lost track of time. I'd wake up to her texts in the morning, saying she was fine and on her way home. Every part of me wanted to believe it, to pretend we were just going through a phase. But the distance between us kept growing, and eventually I started to feel like a guest in my own relationship. Then came the moment everything broke. She was getting ready to go out again, standing in front of the mirror in a new dress I hadn't seen before, humming softly as she did her makeup. I asked her if she wanted to stay in, maybe try that new restaurant we'd been talking about. She sighed, annoyed like I was asking too much. She said something about how I didn't trust her, how I was always questioning her friendship with Dylan, and then she said it, the sentence that ended everything. She said that if I couldn't trust her hanging out with her ex every weekend, then maybe we shouldn't be together. I don't think she expected me to take her seriously, but for the first time in a long time, something in me felt clear. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I simply accepted what she'd said. That night, while she was out, I sent an email to my boss accepting the London position. I told him I could start in 2 weeks. The decision felt like breathing after being underwater too long. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. The next morning, when she realized I meant it, she panicked. She called, texted, begged me to talk. She said she hadn't meant it, that I was being dramatic, that I was throwing everything away. But I didn't answer. Instead, I started packing. Within a few days, the breakup became public knowledge among our friends. People were shocked, mostly because Jade was telling them that I had lost my mind, that I was abandoning her for a job because I couldn't handle commitment. Her version of events made me sound like a heartless workaholic who suddenly decided to move across the world. Then, as if the universe wanted to confirm that I had made the right decision, the truth began to surface. My friend Ethan, who worked at the same gym as Dylan, called me one evening. He told me he'd overheard Dylan bragging about a woman he was seeing, a woman whose boyfriend thought they were having book club. A few hours later, Ethan sent me screenshots from a group chat where Dylan had written those exact words. I remember reading those messages over and over, feeling oddly calm. There was no explosion of anger, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet understanding that everything I'd felt was real. The gaslighting, the excuses, the endless insistence that I was the problem. It all made sense now. I forwarded the screenshots to Jade without a message. I didn't need to explain anything. She called me over and over, but I didn't pick up. I didn't want to hear her voice anymore. From that moment, I stopped looking back. I gave my notice at work, finalized the move, arranged for my things to be shipped to London. My company took care of everything: flights, relocation, a temporary apartment until I found something permanent. It felt surreal how easily life moved forward once I stopped fighting it. Of course, Jade didn't go quietly. The morning of my flight, she showed up at my apartment with her mother and sister, trying to stage some kind of intervention. They told me Jade was worried about my mental health, that I was making impulsive decisions, that I was having some kind of breakdown. I remember standing there, holding my boarding pass, wondering how people could twist reality so easily when it didn't serve them. I calmly explained that this wasn't a breakdown, it was a promotion, a new chapter. I told them Jade had made her choice, and I was finally making mine. When they realized they couldn't convince me, they tried to guilt me instead. They said I was abandoning her, that she had nowhere to go. But she wasn't even on the lease. All her mail went to her parents' house. She'd never really moved in, just stayed so often that it felt like she had. Eventually they left, their faces pale and uncertain. I think that was the first time any of them saw that Jade might not be the victim she pretended to be. A few hours later, while I was waiting to board my flight, I posted a photo of my luggage and the departure board. The caption simply said, "New adventure begins." Within minutes, my phone blew up. Messages from friends, co-workers, even old classmates wishing me luck or asking what had happened. And then there was Jade. She messaged me one last time, asking what I was doing that weekend, as if we could just pretend nothing had happened. I replied with a photo from the airport, the London flight number visible behind me. She accused me of being cruel, of making fun of her, but I wasn't trying to be funny. I was simply done. When I finally turned off my phone and the plane lifted off the ground, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the years I'd spent trying to make something work that had been broken for a long time. Relief that I had finally chosen myself. As the city shrank beneath the clouds, I realized that sometimes the most painful endings are also the cleanest ones. By the time we crossed the Atlantic, I was no longer Ryan who stayed. I was Ryan who left. And for the first time in years, I felt like exactly who I needed to be. When I landed in London, I expected the city to feel foreign, overwhelming even. But it didn't. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. The sky was overcast, the air cool and damp, and the streets alive in a way that made me feel like I'd stepped into motion after years of standing still. Everything was new, uncertain, and beautifully indifferent to my past. The company had arranged a temporary flat near the river, a renovated loft with exposed brick, wide windows, and a view of the Thames that looked unreal at night. I remember standing there my first evening, unpacking a single suitcase, realizing that every piece of my life back home now belonged to someone else. The space was quiet, but it was a comforting quiet, not the strained silence that used to fill our apartment. Work became my anchor. The London office was smaller but full of energy. People who challenged me, respected me, treated me like I mattered. For the first time in years, I woke up eager to go to work. I was leading projects, making decisions, building something that felt mine. It was both exhilarating and terrifying to realize how much of myself I had put on hold before. Of course, the past didn't stay behind easily. A few weeks after my move, I discovered that Jade had taken our breakup public. On her social media, she posted a long emotional story about how I had abandoned her without warning, how I had chosen money over love, how she had been blindsided by my decision to leave. She painted herself as the heartbroken partner who had tried everything to make things work. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The comments did the work for me. People weren't blind. They remembered her constant posts from Dylan's apartment, the endless book club weekends. It didn't take long for others to point out the hypocrisy. I watched the entire situation unravel from across the ocean, detached but not unaffected. Seeing her lies dismantled piece by people she thought were on her side was strangely cathartic. But the real twist came unexpectedly. One afternoon, I received a message from someone named Olivia. I didn't recognize the name at first until she introduced herself as Dylan's girlfriend, or as she phrased it, former girlfriend. She had found me through Jade's posts and wanted to know if what she'd been told was true. Dylan had apparently described Jade as an obsessive ex who couldn't let go. When I told her the real story and shared the screenshots I'd been sent, she didn't respond for a long time. Then she thanked me, saying it finally made sense. And later that night, she messaged me again, this time sending screenshots of her own. In them, Dylan was downplaying me completely, telling her that Jade was just lonely because her boyfriend worked too much, that she needed company, and that I was some guy barely making 40 grand. I couldn't help but laugh. The pettiness of it all was absurd. But Olivia wasn't laughing. She broke up with Dylan in spectacular fashion by posting every screenshot publicly, tagging him and calling him out by name. The story spread quickly, both in our circle and in his workplace. Within days, he became a walking cautionary tale. I didn't expect to hear from him after that, but of course, he reached out. He called from different numbers, sent me long, angry messages blaming me for what had happened. According to him, I had ruined his life, but he had done that all by himself. I ignored him, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't care anymore. His drama wasn't mine to manage. Jade, however, wasn't done. A few weeks after Olivia's public revelation, she appeared in London. She had somehow found out where I worked, apparently through one of my coworkers' social media posts, and decided to show up at the office. Security didn't let her in, thankfully, but she waited outside for hours. When I finally saw her standing near the entrance that evening, I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted, as if the last few months had drained every ounce of confidence she'd once carried. Against my better judgment, I agreed to have coffee with her. She told me she'd made mistakes, that she'd been confused, that she thought she could balance both her past and her present. She said she hadn't realized how much she'd hurt me until I was gone. There was a time when hearing those words might have cracked something open in me, but not anymore. Listening to her felt like watching an old movie I'd seen too many times. The story was the same, the characters unchanged. She apologized, said she'd cut ties with Dylan, that she was trying to better herself. She wanted me to believe she'd changed, but everything about the conversation felt rehearsed, as if she was playing a part she didn't quite understand. When she mentioned that she had started therapy and was focusing on growth, I genuinely hoped it was true. Everyone deserves a chance to become better, but her version of growth still centered around me. Around what I could give her, what I could forgive. I realized then that she wasn't trying to rebuild herself. She was trying to reclaim control. At one point, she claimed she might be pregnant. For a split second, my heart froze. Then logic returned, swift and undeniable. It wasn't possible. We hadn't been together in months. She saw the truth reflected in my face and broke down completely. She admitted she had lied, that she only said it because she wanted me to care again. I felt no anger. Just a deep, aching sadness for the person she had become. That night, she flew back home. She sent me one last message before her flight, saying she would wait for me, no matter how long it takes. I didn't respond. I blocked her everywhere. 2 weeks later, she moved on to someone new, a CrossFit trainer named Kieran. I found out because Mia, her best friend, sent me screenshots of their endless posts together, filled with motivational captions about finding the right person and learning to love yourself. It was predictable, almost painfully so. Jade had always needed someone to mirror herself in. I thought that would be the end of it, but then Dylan reappeared in the most absurd way imaginable, through LinkedIn. He sent a message congratulating me on my success, saying he had just accepted a job offer in London and wanted to grab a beer and clear the air. I remember laughing when I read it. The audacity was almost impressive. I ignored the message. A month later, he moved into my building. The company he worked for had the same housing partnership as mine, and he ended up a few floors below me. The first time I ran into him in the lobby, he was with a much younger woman. He introduced me as his buddy. I corrected him politely, told him we weren't friends, and walked away. Apparently, his new girlfriend later Googled him, found Olivia's old posts, and accidentally broke up with him in the building's WhatsApp group instead of messaging him privately. The entire building saw it. From that day on, everyone started calling him Book Club. I never laughed out loud, but I won't lie, it felt poetic. As for Jade, her new relationship didn't last long either. I heard through mutual friends that she discovered her CrossFit boyfriend had been just friends with his ex, spending weekends training together. She caught them in what was described as a compromising position. A few days later, she sent me a message on an app I'd forgotten to block her on, saying she finally understood how I'd felt. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Then came the final twist. The kind of irony life delivers with a smirk. Remember that tax scheme she used to avoid city taxes by claiming she still lived with her parents? Well, it caught up with her. Someone reported it to the authorities, and she was forced to pay 3 years' worth of back taxes and penalties. I later learned, through a chain of whispers, that the person who reported her was Olivia, who, as fate would have it, worked for the state tax department. The universe has an impeccable sense of humor. In the months that followed, my life in London flourished. The promotion became permanent, and the company offered me a long-term contract. My salary increased again, and I found a rhythm I hadn't known I was capable of. I started running along the river in the mornings, exploring new neighborhoods on weekends, rediscovering who I was when I wasn't someone's afterthought. And then I met Off. She worked in publishing, Irish by birth, sharp-witted, with a laugh that made you forget what you were worried about. We met at a networking event neither of us wanted to attend, and somehow ended up talking for hours. There was an ease about her. No games, no past haunting her weekends, no invisible comparisons. She listened, really listened, and when I told her the story of the so-called book club, she laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. Being with her felt different. There was no tension, no invisible competition for honesty. For the first time, I felt chosen without having to earn it. It made me realize how exhausting it had been to love someone who constantly made me prove I was enough. 6 months after moving to London, I had my review meeting. They offered me another raise and a permanent position with more responsibility. I said yes without hesitation. When I left the office that day, I walked home along the river, thinking about how far I'd come from the man who once begged someone to choose him over her ex. Sometimes, I still think about Jade, not with anger, but with a kind of distant empathy. I hope she learns to stop defining herself by who she's with. Last I checked, she had posted something on social media about growing through what you go through. The comments were turned off. People sometimes ask if I regret how things ended, if I ever wonder what would have happened had I stayed. But regret isn't the right word. I gave that relationship everything I had. My time, my trust, my future. I turned down a life-changing opportunity twice for someone who was already halfway out the door. I don't regret leaving. I regret not leaving sooner. Now, I wake up every morning to the sound of the city outside my window, make coffee with Iwefa, and feel grateful that I finally know what peace feels like. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on someone else's approval. And sometimes, when I pass the lobby and see Dylan awkwardly avoiding eye contact while the guards jokingly call him Book Club, I can't help but smile. Not out of spite, but because life has a funny way of settling its own scores. So if you've ever been in a situation where someone makes you feel like trusting them means tolerating disrespect, remember this. Trust isn't about ignoring your intuition. It's about recognizing when someone's actions speak louder than their excuses. I learned that the hard way. But I also learned that starting over isn't the same as losing. Sometimes it's the only way to find out who you really are when no one else is defining you. London gave me that gift. Freedom, growth, and a future that finally feels like mine. And if Jade ever reads this, because I know she still checks my profiles from fake accounts, I hope she finds her version of peace too. Because in the end, that's all I ever wanted for both of us. To stop pretending, to stop settling, and to finally be honest about what we deserve. Questions for the viewers. Have you ever stayed in a relationship long after you knew it was over? What was the moment that finally made you choose yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know your stories. Thank you for staying with me until the end. How would you have acted in the protagonist's place? Write your thoughts in the comments. More fresh and controversial stories every day on my profile. Like and subscribe to this channel